although the Americans continue to insist, and they're right to some extent, that these ties are not linked to any particular set of people ruling in Islamabad. I mean, they say that whether it is Imran Khan or Shahbaz Sharif or whoever else in Islamabad, that does not make any difference to U.S. Pakistan relations. But it seems that since the departure of the PTI government, there has been at least some improvement in bilateral ties. The way the PTI government conducted itself since the former Prime Minister's visit to Moscow on the day that the Russians invaded Ukraine, that really created doubts and suspicions in Washington about Pakistan's intentions. Policy makers in Washington have not issued a public statement on that, but they also have not made any, they have not kept it a secret that they were not very happy with the visit. You know, we all know about this, the so-called Cablegate scandal, where a U.S. diplomat openly shared his department's unhappiness with the visit. And then if you listen to the conversation taking place in U.S. think tanks and other similar meetings, you will see that they too were not very happy with the visit. They thought that Pakistan, the visit has intentionally or unintentionally, has undermined U.S. efforts to isolate Russia. And when you say they have not been able to finalize the date, it indicates two things. Number one, of course, you find a date which is appropriate when both sides are available for the meeting and for the visit. But it also indicates that it is not as top a priority as it seems, because had it been a top priority visit, they could have easily adjusted other engagements to fit in the visit of the Pakistani army chief. In Washington, it seems that they are not happy, and they're not unhappy or upset with the Pakistani military, but they do have concerns about the political situation in Islamabad. They don't know how things will settle down with the government that is in power. Will it stay, or how long will it stay? How the opposition's protest, particularly PTI's protest, is going to unfold? Will the country remain stable? And all these concerns obviously make policymakers to believe that it is better to wait rather than rushing into a meeting. And they obviously are also concerned about the political implications of such a meeting. I mean, if the Pakistan army chief comes, it will be interpreted in a certain way in Pakistan, because unfortunately it has turned into sort of an army versus the PTI conflict. And the Americans, even if they want to support one party or the other, they will not like to be seen publicly as supporting anyone. So there are a lot of ifs and buts that need to be sorted out before the visit actually happens. I mean, they should have realized this earlier. The entire, fuss created over the so-called diplomatic cable was difficult to justify. You see, first of all, that was not a cable sent by an American diplomat. That was a cable sent by the Pakistani ambassador in Washington. It contained his or his team's assessment of a meeting that happened between him and Mr. Donald Lu and his team, who is in charge of the South and Central Asian Department at the U.S. State Department, South and Central Asian Bureau at the U.S. State Department. So that was the Pakistan Embassy's assessment of the meeting. Obviously, it included quotes from the conversation, but nevertheless, it was a Pakistani cable. Number two, if you see the contents that have been published in the media, and I have also been fortunate enough to discuss this with people involved from both sides, and to me it seems that there was no conspiracy. There was no threat. It was a harsh expression of Washington's feelings about Imran Khan's visit to Moscow. They wanted to let the Pakistanis know that they are upset with the visit, and they wanted to they did not mince words in saying so. They made it very obvious, and they also said that this unhappiness or these bad feelings will continue as long as this government is in power, or as long as this government continues its policies. Now, I don't understand when we react in Pakistan. Oh, okay, see, this is what the Americans are saying. They want us to change our policies. Of course they want to change your policies. They want you to change your policies. That is what diplomacy is all about. Every government wants policies that suits its interest. Every state wants policies that suits its interest. The Americans would definitely, they have influence in Pakistan, they have influence in other parts of the world, and they do and always shall use their influence to soften things in their favor. And that is what the conversation was about. It was, conversation was meant to let the Pakistanis know that they are unhappy and that Pakistan needs to change or adjust its policies towards Russia, and that Pakistan needs to support the U.S. position on Ukraine. Now, it was up to us to respond with and we did. I mean, we did not change our policies as long as the PTI government was in power, and we did keep on talking about buying oil from Russia, on improving relations with Russia, on explaining why the former Prime Minister visited Moscow as he did. So, of course, we were sort of defending our policies, and they were pushing us to soften our policies. This is what I think diplomacy is all about. You can call it rather a hard, above normal push from the United States to make Pakistan understand its position on the Ukraine conflict, but it was no conspiracy to topple a government. It was no it's nothing very unusual. These diplomatic dinners and lunches, they are seen as opportunities by both sides to convey the feelings that they cannot otherwise do through formal and proper diplomatic channels. And Pakistan does that all the time. We did this often on Afghanistan, telling the Americans that their policies would bring a disaster, that their policies were only strengthening the Taliban, that they need to disengage and all sorts of things. And that's what the Americans say, but that we heard you and responded the way we had to respond, but we did not make it a public debate, because diplomatic conversations are never turned into public debates or a political campaign, which Pakistan did, and Americans are very happy with that. They didn't want it to be. They were expecting Pakistan to react. They were ready for a harsh reaction from Pakistan, but they were not expecting this to become a political campaign. And now I think the PTI seems to have realized this mistake. It is reaching out to the Americans. They have hired PR company, they don't call it a lobbyist, a PR company, to let their position on these issues known. That company has already started issuing press releases and statements explaining PTI's policies, and I think it is a step in the right direction. I disagree with those who say that that PTI is bringing Pakistan's domestic policies to the international arena, and that PTI is, by doing so, PTI is committing an act of treason. No, it is no treason, nothing. It is something that Pakistani political parties have always done, and I think PTI should have done this long before. I mean, it was very strange when I saw PTI workers chanting slogans against Donald Lu. Who is Donald Lu? He is just a low-level State Department official who was conveying a certain sort of a message, but he is not a policy maker. He is not the chairman of a Congress committee, or he is not the Secretary of State, or he is not the President of the United States. He is in no way in a position to actually influence the process of decision making in Washington. I don't know why we did that. It was a very, very strange thing for me. I think they are realizing that they have opened too many fronts, that there was no need to actually take on so many people at the same time or so many powers at the same time. And first, I think the first on their list is the United States of America. They do realize that they, in trying to win over political advantage at home, they ended up doing an irreparable damage to the relations with the United States and even to Pakistan's relations with the United States. And that is why now they are trying to sort of reconcile with some of the people they annoyed during this process. They have had their concerns about the Pakistani military also, particularly on Afghanistan, on claiming that the Pakistani army, which the army denies, but the Americans claim that the Pakistani army has been helping the Haqqani network, that they enable the Taliban to take over Kabul, which obviously Pakistan disagrees with. Pakistan rightly points out that you were there, you had hundreds of thousands of troops in Afghanistan, and you actually failed to win over the war. But Americans believe that Pakistan did contribute to their failure, but whatever. So they have had those kind of concerns about the Pakistani army, and but they also think that the Pakistani army was not yet ready to move away from the United States, that they have been trained here, that they are used to American weapons, and that they would like to retain that relationship. So even if they toyed with the idea of improving relations with Russia, the army does not want to do so at the risk of losing the United States. They want to improve the relations with Russia, but they also want to maintain the tie that they have with the United States. It's a difficult job, but that's what people in Washington believe in. But Imran, after this Moscow visit, Imran Khan, whether it was his by design or not, came across as someone who was ready to break up with Washington and was seeking a new pattern, not just in life, but a pattern in Moscow. And this was something that was not appreciated in Washington.